Hey there, I'm Jozwiak, and I'm an online student. My level begins with the player walking down this pathway where they can see the next level ahead. As the player goes under the stone archway, the ground gives out from under them, trapping them in this corridor. As the player proceeds to the end of the corridor, the stairs crumble under the player's weight, trapping them at the bottom of the silo. In the next room, the player is introduced to the power cell mechanic. As the player enters this room, they can see the power cell faintly glowing in the corner. As they proceed over to it, they will have to place it into the emergency power socket to proceed through the doorway. Proceeding through the doorway, the player can take in the full scope of the level. The lighting in this room is set up to guide the player towards the fan as well as the audio. The player is then prompted that the power cell is powering the fan and that they should remove it to proceed forward. After ascending the ramp, the player receives a note that says that the bridge needs to have a power override. Proceeding forward, the player is introduced to the timer mechanic. After crouching under this debris, the player can retrieve the uranium sample as well as start their introduction to the timers. After pressing E to activate the timer, it opens up a small vent hidden behind these crates. The player can then proceed through the vent to finish the timer introduction. After exiting the vent, the player will begin the timer practice. Once the player hits E to activate the timer, they will have to crawl through the small vent and then cross over the now powered bridge. Upon removing the power cell from the socket, they will have to transport it up to the doorway above in order to proceed forward. Once the power cell has been inserted, the player can then begin the timer remaster. After hitting this button, the player will have to rush to the top of the ramps and get through the doorway before the door closes. For the second half of the timer remaster, the player must navigate the upper catwalks and proceed over to the timer on the other side of the room. Once the player activates this timer, it opens the emergency silo door above. They will then have to race to the top before the timer ends and closes the silo, entrapping them in. And then after a brisk walk down this pathway, the player will proceed to the next level.
My name's Andrew Dennis, and this is my level where the mission is to find an old bottle of whiskey so a bass can try to replicate the good stuff from back in the day. First, you're introduced to my first mechanic, these barrels. If you run into them, they will damage you, but then you move immediately into practicing with them, where you have to use them to overcome the next obstacle and progress in the level. Then we'll be coming to the second major mechanic, this fire. There will be several things in the level that will be on fire, and entering in those damage zones will damage you significantly. Next, we practice the fire, and you've got these two alternating streams of fire, and you have to time when you move through them. Here we come to the twist in my level, where you have to use the fire to light one of these barrels on fire, and then it is an explosive to allow you into this building. It also catches the building on fire, and in this master step, as you progress, you will see the fire spreading. Damage volumes will be following it. Right up here, you see there's a damage volume and fire as the stairs collapse, and then it spreads again. But you come down these steps, and you find that bottle of whiskey, and you move on. Thank you very much.
I am Hunter Cahill, and this is my level Lab Rats. The player is tasked by the Basts to collect a green vial of liquid for the cure. As you enter the lobby area, this is the introduce mechanic for both the button and the pressure plate. You press the button and a little crate will fall down. You must put this onto the pressure plate to open up the door. This enters the practice room where you have to press this button to grab this crate and put it onto the pressure plate here on the floor to extend the bridge. Along the way, you will collect a couple of scrappers' notes. Now, when you get to the other side of the bridge, you will notice this button, which you need to press to get into the room to collect the second box for the practice to open up this door to allow you to enter towards the mass stores. Now, this button does not work, and the note will tell the player that they need to come back to this. So they will run and move this object, hiding this button, which will take you into the room with the pressure plate and the crate. The player can also collect a research note here. This pressure plate will open up the door to the lab, which is where the player will find the final research note and the green vial that the Basts want. Now that the player has the green vial, they are able to run back through the level and up to the top, where they will now be able to open up this button and lead into the next level.
My name is Heather Byrom, and this is Search for the Cure. In this level, the player is tasked with finding vital specimens in the experiment floor of this abandoned lab. Here, the power supply mechanic is introduced to open the front door. Shortly after, the same mechanic is practiced by turning on the power to the building. If the player does not do this and exits the lobby, then they will find all of the common room doors are powered off. Here, the pressure pads are introduced, allowing the player access to the full extent of the building. The door to the meeting and living areas is broken, but luckily, so is this window and wall. In the kitchen, the player finds an info scrap that informs the player that the stairwell to the third floor is blocked and they have to find another way in. Maybe the vents? In these cubicles, they will find their third bit of research continuing on from the previous level. In the main office is the last bit of research and a power supply. The lower level is blocked with debris, and even if they somehow make it past that, the door is barred from inside the experiment room, denying access. At the top of the stairs, the player is rewarded with another power supply. After this brief hallway, the player finds the meeting and living areas. It is here that the pressure pad is practiced. In this meeting room, 2 power supplies can be found, as well as a power supply input that activates a tranquil pawn light for those long hours as a scientist. Through this door is a living area, where the player will find one last power supply and the practice input to disable fans in the vents, which can be heard briefly before powering off. Using the grapnel, the player can lift the grate and then jump down through the vent fan till they get to the third floor. Once down here, they lift the grate and enter the experiments room. They can collect an info scrap telling them the experiment rooms are locked. The lighting directs them to the mastery power supply inputs at the far wall, each one powering on their respective room. To open the doors, the player must stand on the mastery pressure pads located on the inside and outside of 2 out of 3 rooms. In each of these hazardous-looking rooms, the player will find the specimens they've been tasked with retrieving. This last room has no exit pressure pad, but has lighting that directs the player to a gap in the wall, leading them out of this level and into the next.
Hello, my name is Brice Landry, and welcome to my level. The goal of my level is to find all the notes scattered across the map, and a little surprise hidden in the end. The player will come across a conveyor belt in which they will have to use to get through a vent into the next room. This is because the door is blocked and the player will have to use their wits to proceed. Once the player gets through the vent, they will find themselves in a production room in which they will have to find rubber scattered throughout the room. There will be two pieces in which they will have to find, one directly next to the collector and the other one on the other end of the room. Once those are gathered, they will find that they have created a gas canister in which is needed to fuel the generator to open the door. Once the player leaves the room, they'll find themselves in an alleyway in which they'll need to use boxes to climb into the next building. Once the player is inside, they will have to use the collector stationed there and collect 4 piles of screws. Once they have done that, they would make a miniature AC unit in which they would use to climb into the catwalk. To simplify searching for these items, I've laid out red lanterns, and which should help reduce the time needed to search for these items. Once the player leaves the building, they will find themselves in a loading bay with a contraption of conveyors. The player can choose to guide the box through the conveyors or to carry it onto the ramp. Either way, it will precede you to the next area. Onto the last area, the player will find a special car waiting for them. However, this car needs to be fixed and requires 2 collectors to find the pieces for it. One collector will require 4 screws, and the other collector will require 4 pistons. Once the player finds all the screws for one collector, they will be awarded with a throttle in which they can insert into the car. The other collector will give them a camshaft in which they can also insert into the car. Once the car is fixed, they will be able to drive it over to the base tower and finish the game.